Hey guys, it's Jennifer from Better by the Day 24. Welcome back or welcome to. It is the first day of August today. Summer just seemed to have flown by. But anyway, we're here. I'm here to kind of spread the word and get myself a little daily therapy to anyone and everyone that's had any experiences, positive or negative, with psychiatric medications, i.e. Antidepressants, SSRIs, but especially benzodiazepine, because this is now, without a doubt, a national mental and physical health crisis, just as bad, if not worse, as fentanyl. And the reason I believe that is obviously there was a problem when doctors started abruptly cutting people off with fentanyl, and I mean with like OxyContin or pain medications, opiates or opioids. Tramadol was a huge problem in that they didn't even consider it a controlled substance until like 2015. They were doling it out like candy as the great new answer to OxyContin. You can take up to 8 pills a day safely, 50 milligram tablets. It's not a classified or controlled drug, very effective painkiller. After all that insanity with OxyContin, they pulled it again. Obviously, they knew exactly what it was. FDA approved, stamped, and pushed through, because we have to make up for some of this financial loss we're now getting with the OxyContin being much more controlled. So it's happening already with benzodiazepine. And even though the fentanyl crisis has been addressed, it's lessening. That is because finally they've come up with alternatives that unfortunately can't be total abstinence. Methadone is one, and what do you call them? Suboxone is another one that kind of gets you through that interim. So at the very least, you're functional. You can have relationships, you can maintain a job, you can do well, you can go back to school, you can do all these things. Even if you get through a long-term withdrawal on these narcotics, the depressional aspect, because what it's messed with in your brain, usually for years and years, just let a lot of people back out there. And it was the abrupt cutoff before these programs were put in place that caused the crisis, that caused the demand for it. What's going to happen with benzodiazepine? I don't think that can be duplicated in a lab or by the illegal kingpins. I think the psychiatrists and the doctors that have prescribed them for decades and decades and decades are legal kingpins. But be that as it may, we're there. And I mean, the hundreds and hundreds of voices I've heard personally now, the testimonies, the people going before legislation in Massachusetts and having 3 of the most renowned psychiatrists affiliated with McLean Hospital, one of the most renowned psychiatric hospitals in the country, all stating there is absolutely no problem whatsoever with benzodiazepine. One, this is almost verbatim said, in my 40 years of practice, neither I or any of my colleagues, I haven't heard from any of my colleagues of anybody having any problem getting off these medications. And the legislation not being passed based on this professional opinion. I don't know if it's really true ignorance, total ignorance. Ego plays a huge role, I've found, in my own lawsuit pending against neuropsychiatric clinics in Georgia, Villarica and Dallas, and now, oh God, they've gone out to Florida and they're targeting the elderly. But in any event, this is part 3, and I'm going to try to keep it brief today, because part 4 will go into some heavy duty, stuff once I got literally like abandoned at 13 and sent off into the system in my experiences there. If not for the social worker that I had throughout the whole time, Mary Ellen Babbitt, things would have been much, much darker. And some of you may ask why. I mean, normally if you're listening to a testimony about benzodiazepines, they're kind of starting with the how and when and why they were prescribed. And most of the testimonies I've heard were from relatively stable backgrounds, college-educated women. One that won a huge 8-figure lawsuit against the doctor, the entire practice, as a matter of fact, because they kept sending her within psychiatrists and primaries that were all under the same umbrella. She was the director of like a pediatric ICC unit, and she had been doing it for almost 30 years, I want to say, and loved her job, was so good at it, so highly respected. And most of the backgrounds are like that. But you know what's the exact same, regardless of the background and the history, is the shame that we've carried, that we've been assigned by these doctors, and some of us, our family around us. Most of the women with a different kind of a background basically just had very, very supportive spouses, which I do too, and I'm really grateful for, but that wasn't always the case. My history is a little bit different, and I'm also finding, since I've discovered what's wrong with me, it frees me up of the shame and all the accountability and responsibility I took that I didn't own, and I mean well into adulthood. Now, don't get me wrong, I effed up a whole lot, sometimes astronomically. There's a big difference between a mistake, like, maybe not wanting to go into the left lane and not realizing a car was in your blind spot and just missing it. That's a mistake. But the truth of the matter is, most mistakes are actual choices and decisions, and we say, oops, my bad, I'm sorry, afterwards. And people have a really hard time taking responsibility with that. And so even at this phase, it's been very, I don't want to say difficult, because I'm mastering it pretty well, but there's a lot of emotional upheaval in just telling my story. It's very personal. It involves personal interaction and information about other people. So I kind of want to make it clear about the difference between your personal truth, my personal truth, and the truth. What my entire goal is here is to just tell the truth, exactly how it happens. Now, I have feelings about that, obviously. I carried a lot of stuff for a long time, but I try to make it real clear in what is factual truth and what is just my feelings about it. Feelings are not facts. You've probably heard that 1,000 times, but I'll tell you, feelings affect how you see the facts and how you deal with the facts before, during, and after the facts. So, that being said, I left off with, finally, my parents are divorced. There's been a lot of abuse by mother and older sibling, sister. They were really, really teamed up together. I think my sister had a lot more influence on the way my mother behaved, especially afterwards, after I was taken out of the house, which she was like thrilled about. So I'm 13 and I'm now under care of the state. And as we counted, I'm not going to go through all 21 different foster homes and programs and family members I was bounced around to, but I'll go over a few factual things that actually happened. And before I was even under care of the state, and that was a throwaway. Maybe that's a feeling about it, but it still is a fact. They just gave me away and refused to have anything to do with me for the next decade. This is like 13-year-old little girl that had lived through all that shit, you know, still loved my mother to death. I still loved my big sister. I just wanted their approval the whole time, you know, and the way I acted and behaved was absolutely horrific. But I'm going to give myself a pass on this one. I was 13 freaking years old. I'm going to skip that back. But I mean, I was literally a baby. And this had been going on since I was in diapers. Both of them. I would say I was her primary target, but the older sister just like clapped right onto that and was in full support and shared the same feelings, which I think was a projection of how they felt about my father. And it wasn't quite so bad for my younger sister that came after me. I mean, it was bad. She won't tell you she had a happy childhood and felt safe, loved, and secured. We did by our father. We truly, truly did. The alcoholic was more of a responsible, caring, worried parent, protective parent than our mother, which is really unusual. If anything, it's usually the other way around. So that is a fact. That really happened. So before I went into care of the state, the back and forth and the kind of give her away, have to take her back happened with going to live with my father at about 11 throughout the 6th grade. You know, despite the horrible things and the horrible ways my mother felt about this horrible, evil, alcoholic, good for nothing man, she was more than happy to let her 11-year-old go live with him. You know, even if it meant only getting half of a child support check. She would rather do that, and money was very, very important to both her and my older sister. They were smart with it, both hardworking people, there's no doubt, but literal theft had always been a big part of both of their lives. The older sister, I think, was more nefarious because of the way she took money, you know, but my mother had incidences where she was literally like caught shoplifting kind of a thing. And as far as I went, nothing was sacred. Nothing was sacred. You know, absolutely everything that I had, from pictures that she knew meant absolutely everything in the world to me. But I'm getting off track. So went to live with Dad, who I felt very safe, loved, and protected by, but it was like this efficiency apartment, and it was real weird. Like, you know, my twin bed was literally at the door that went outside, and he slept on the couch in this little tiny kitchenette situation. I don't think the landlord was real thrilled with it, and he was an alcoholic, and though he was also lonely and looking for a girlfriend, and though he would try, like, he'd go out at night, you know, he was always there for me. There was always food. He gave an aunt money to take me out, you know, school shopping for clothes. Like, one outfit was supposed to suffice for the year, but my mother was even worse with stuff like that. You know, so it was very, very lonely. I missed my mom. I missed my sisters. I missed my big brother. I missed my school, my home that I grew up in. You know, we get attached to that stuff. And eventually, thank God, he got transferred back to my hometown, working in that area, so I went home. And this is a feelings thing, an observation thing. Mom was less than thrilled about that. The older sister was kind of in and out. She had her boyfriend, her now husband, of like, I don't know, 30 plus years or something. I was spending most of her time with him, but also came in almost the narcissism. This is feeling, opinion based on factual things that we saw and heard, if that makes any sense. was absolutely so profound. I mean, it would take like 2 seconds to diagnose that officially today, although you really can't trust most of the diagnoses of psychiatrists. But the narcissism among the two of them, and the way they looked down their noses, like especially at me, like they'd just be baffled if I accomplished something, which I did. I mean, I was on my own by 13. By 16, I was working full time, had my own apartment, and going to high school at night. Very, very resourceful, and very, very determined, all alone, by myself. That was God. No genius. I once had that kind of a drive, and I believe it really was God-given. So that was the first being out of the house. The second time, as I told you, my father was married when he met my mom, and he left his wife and 3 kids behind. And the oldest, I believe, was my sister, half-sister Linda, who I didn't grow up with her, or my late half-brother Dennis, and then there was an adopted brother, Stephen. But they were definitely, a part of our lives at some point, and Linda, was really sweet. She had then 3 kids of her own, or no, I think Jason was just born. So 4 kids of her own. She had married, and just kind of had her shit together a little bit. So my father asked her, because it was just so bad at home, the abuse and the neglect. This man like lived in a constant state of worry, like particularly for me. At least he knew like my youngest sister wasn't being physically harmed in any way, although horrifically neglected. So she said yes, and I stayed with her and her 4 kids and her new husband. And one thing I touched on before was that lack of structure and routine, and being taught how to do that as a very, very young child. You teach a child, you get up in the morning, you brush your teeth, you have your breakfast, you put your clean clothes on, and you give them some structure and routine. If nothing else, I know my boys had that. I mean, I was a working mom, and they were daycare babies, so there was really no choice. But in that sense, it was a good thing, because it was very, very structured. We had the same bedtime routine every night: bath, stories, hugs, kisses, prayers, without fail, and the same thing in the morning, until all this crap came into my life. But that morning and evening routine basically stayed the same for my kids. She was very, very, very strict with her own kids. My nephew is about my age, her oldest son, and my niece was just a little bit younger. And I remember it was towards the end of the school year, and she had lived in this apartment complex where I knew a lot of people. I went to school with all of them, including the boys. I knew them all. And but she had this thing, like all the kids, despite their age, went to bed at 7:30 sharp. I couldn't even be, by then there was like so much neurological damage done, probably literally like brain injury. You can't take that many blows to the head as a kid and not be neurodivergent, I guess is the new name for it. But like I literally could not do that. I mean, I didn't even start getting sleepy even at that age till like 11 p.m. And then I did go to school with some of these boys, and they found out I was living there, and I slept in a room with my niece, and one of them, I remember, knocked on the window, at 8 o'clock at night, tell me to come out, because that was normal for most of the kids. Most of the kids were out. And she really punished me for that, and she really blamed me for that. I had told her repeatedly I was being bullied really, really, really bad at school. And, got to a point one day I just skipped school. I knew the big fight was going to take place, and I knew what time. You know, of course, I got to the principal, the assistant principal, Mr. Williams, I remember his name, different teachers, nobody, no help whatsoever. So I skipped school, but I did hop on the bus that I could take to her house. And when I got home, obviously I was busted, and I got in a lot of trouble for that. And when I told her why, and that was the truth, the big fight was going to go down that day, she said I should have came to her, but I did. And I'm not dissing on this sister. She had 4 kids of her own, and I was the last thing on earth she needed in this new marriage. So that didn't work out. It just didn't work out, and I went home. And at that time, at least, there were no hard feelings. I used to walk down to her house anyway, and I loved walking the baby and spending time with my niece PM and my nephew Chucky. I just adored him. And then there was the baby Jason and Mary Beth. I just loved them in pieces. But anyway, so that was before actually being signed away. And not just signed away, but it's not like legally I couldn't see anybody or the social worker prevented that. It was pure choice. They just wanted nothing to do with me. And with my mother and sister bonded on that. My big brother, who was not on board with any of this bullshit, we would literally sneak visits. And I remember him feeling so bad about that later on, and he shouldn't have ever felt bad about any of it. If anything, and I told him, I got the chance to tell him before he passed, he was a hero. He was the bravest one in the whole family. If anything good came out of that whole situation from Summer Street, it was my brother Dan. End of story there. So that was the kind of flopping around before the whole program started. And we're going to end it there for today. And as I said in part 4, I'm not going to get into every single program in foster home and where I landed, because I was basically on my own at 16, and that's when a lot more trauma started shaping things. So anyway, that is that. And again, we're talking about hopefully passing some legislation, thank you, I did say that right, to get some control. When I say control, for benzodiazepine, the worst thing that could happen right now is for doctors to start cutting them off. As a matter of fact, they're being held accountable for doing that because they're so dangerous. Even improper tapering, let alone an abrupt cutoff, you're literally putting a patient's life at risk with that. And they did so with impunity for decades, but not anymore. Past 5 to 7 years, none of them have ever gotten to jury. They settle out pretty quick, which is probably what will happen in my case. And again, if you're in the Georgia area or now Florida, and you need psychiatric medication, because that's all they really do. It's not counseling or therapy or help, other than just 4 questions they ask. Are you seeing or hearing anything? Are you able to keep up with your daily hygiene? What, if any, effects are you having on the medication? That's it. They don't care what's going on in your marriage, with your children, your childhood, your trauma, your present trauma, your past trauma, and how you're really feeling inside. And they don't want to hear it. They really don't want to hear it. If you tell them you're having a bad reaction and your symptoms are related to the benzodiazepine, they're going to cut you off and give you an SSRI, even though, that's their norm as of now. but I think with more and more of them being held into accountability, again, before I forget, neuropsychiatric clinics, formerly known as Neuropsychiatric of Atlantis. They now have offices in Villa Rica, Georgia, Dallas, Georgia, and they opened one in Florida that is clearly aimed and advertised and websited to the elderly, which is a very vulnerable population. So I want to write an email to DeSantis and warn him what's going on, but let's see what happens with the suit anyway. They'll be served like, well, what? I can only say so much. I know that my records are being subpoenaed because they refused them. So to keep it in the present, I really want to give a warning about that, and again warn you all that Klonopin only is no longer showing up in urines, or they are only doing so very sporadically. Any other benzodiazepine, Valium, Xanax, Ativan, no problem. For some reason, they've removed the compound in the labs. I know nothing about how this works, but they've removed the compound or whatever it was that made Klonopin show up. It doesn't. My last one in June did not. I had one independently done a few weeks ago that I actually paid for it to take to another doctor that I see that I think I had an appointment with today, but I'll find out. So that's not showing up, and that could cause a big problem if that's the benzodiazepine that you take and you're trying to taper from it. And on a lighter note, I think I have found a doctor. She actually said I could interview her or our first consult together. She's either an osteopath or functional medicine. But once I make the appointment and it's established and we have that first consult, which I'll tape, I'll share that with you guys. So on that note, everybody have a great weekend. I'm going to touch a little bit on, part 4 over the weekend. And we are getting there. We are getting to where my whole life turned around and was absolutely beautiful and blessed to being prescribed SSRIs and benzodiazepines. So anyway, y'all have a blessed weekend, and try to remember your personal truth is your personal truth, and you need to honor that within yourself. Same thing with me. I know what my personal truth is. It can, because our emotions absolutely filter into our personal truths, it may not be the truth. There's a difference, and I'm going to give you some good examples in the next video. So have a great weekend. Bye guys.